1976, Louisiana. This pilot Barry Seal is about to break the law and become one of the most prolific drug runners in America. He will fly over 50,000 kilos of drugs from all over into America and drop them into the Ozark swamps. But before he was a drug runner, Barry was a child. He was born July 16, 1939 in Baton Rouge, and from the moment he could stand, he wanted to fly. When Barry was 15, he walked into the local airfield with a simple question: "Can someone teach me how to fly?" The instructors laughed until they saw him sit in the cockpit. He had an instinct for flight, something you can't teach. Within months, he performed his first solo flight. By 16, he had already earned his pilot's license, and by 20, he became a Trans World Airlines pilot, one of the youngest commercial pilots on their entire roster. But for Barry, it still wasn't enough. He was a natural thrill seeker. Routine flights, strict schedules, and corporate checklists slowly started to suffocate him. On his days off, while most pilots went home to their families, Barry wandered to small, rural airstrips, places where the rules were looser and the pilots were different. These weren't TWA captains. These were men moving cargo that didn't appear on any flight manifest. After a while, he finally got asked the question, "Do you want to make real money?" That question was the doorway, and Barry stepped through it without a second thought. So one night in 1976, he met a group of pilots at a dirt strip outside Louisiana. The plane waiting for him wasn't a polished TWA jet. It was a beat-up twin-engine prop with the seats ripped out and the floor reinforced. Barry looked inside. No passengers, no luggage, just crates. Unmarked, unregistered, illegal. One of the men patted the side of the box and said, "Guns going south, cash and weed coming back. Simple flight. Pays 5 times what TWA does in a month." Barry didn't blink. He climbed in, fired up the engines, and taxied down that dusty strip like he'd done it 1,000 times. And just like that, Barry Seal became a smuggler. That first flight was supposed to be a one-time thing. Just some quick cash. Just a little excitement. But once he landed, once he was handed that thick envelope full of money, something clicked inside him. Flying for TWA paid the bills. Flying for the underworld made him feel alive. Word spread fast among the smugglers. Barry Seal wasn't just good. He was the best pilot they had ever seen. He could fly low, smooth, and silent. And unlike most smugglers, Barry didn't drink. He didn't panic. He didn't fold. He was a professional airline captain flying illegal routes with the precision of a surgeon, so the jobs kept coming. Weapons runs, cash drops, marijuana pickups along the Gulf. Every job paid more than the last, and Barry kept saying yes. He still wore his TWA uniform during the day. And at night, he was skimming treetops at 160 knots with illegal cargo strapped to the floor. 2 lives. 1 man. But the small-time jobs weren't going to last. Barry was too good. Good enough that his name and his reputation started echoing far beyond Louisiana down into Panama, across Honduras, and straight into Colombia, where a rising cocaine empire was searching for pilots who could fly better, faster, and lower than anyone else, pilots like Barry Seal. And soon, the men Barry met at those little airstrips would introduce him to people far more dangerous, people whose names the world would never forget. This is where the Medellin cartel enters the story. The Medellin cartel wasn't just any group. It consisted of names you probably know: Pablo Escobar, Carlos Lehder, the Ochoa brothers, men who would go on to control nearly 80% of the world's cocaine. And now Barry Seal was standing on the edge of a private airstrip outside Medellin, Colombia, about to walk into his first meeting with the people who ran it all. He was about to meet the architects of the cocaine empire. As Barry stood there on that dusty Colombian airstrip, armed guards watched him from the shadows, their rifles resting casually. As if violence was just part of the scenery, a man stepped forward, not Escobar himself, but someone high enough in the organization that Barry instantly understood the stakes. There were no handshakes, no introductions, just a simple gesture toward a twin-engine aircraft sitting on the runway. Inside it, bales of cocaine stacked to the ceiling. The man looked at Barry and said, "We need someone who can fly this into the United States." Barry didn't blink. He sized up the plane, the weight, the route, the risk. This wasn't weed. This wasn't cash. This was the real product, the one worth billions. "Can you handle it?" the man asked. Barry Seal smiled. "I can handle anything that flies." And with that, his life, and the entire American drug trade, was about to change forever. Barry agreed to the job, and within days, he was on his first run for the Medellin cartel. No passengers, no uniforms, just a small plane loaded with hundreds of kilos of cocaine. He took off from a private airstrip outside Medellin, flew low across the Gulf to avoid radar, and headed straight for the southern United States. His destination wasn't an airport. It was a quiet, remote stretch of the Ozark swamps, a spot used by smugglers for quick drops. Barry flew over the area, released the load, and kept moving. Pickup crews would handle the rest. A few hours later, he landed back in Louisiana and was handed more cash than he'd ever made in a single night. That was all it took. One flight, one payout of roughly $250,000, and Barry Seal knew his life had officially changed. After that first payout, Barry didn't slow down. He sped up. What was supposed to be a one-time job quickly became a routine. The cartels saw how skilled he was, how calm, how precise, and they started giving him more flights, bigger loads, and higher payouts. Barry went from a part-time smuggler to a full-time asset almost overnight. Week after week, he was flying cocaine into the U.S., dropping it in remote swamps, backwoods fields, and hidden landing strips. And every run brought in hundreds of thousands of dollars. The money piled up fast. Too fast. Barry bought new planes, new properties, vehicles, anything he wanted. But with every successful flight, two things were happening. He was becoming one of the cartel's most valuable pilots. The U.S. government was starting to notice. Barry thought he was untouchable, that his skill in the air made him invisible. But the more he flew, the more attention he attracted. And soon, the DEA would be watching him very closely. As Barry's runs increased, so did the scale of the operation. The cartel trusted him more than almost any other pilot, and they began moving massive loads through him, hundreds of kilos at a time, week after week. Barry needed a base that could handle this kind of traffic. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere law enforcement rarely checked. Somewhere he could take off and land without question. He found that place in Mena, Arkansas. A small rural airport, barely on anyone's radar, suddenly became the hub of one of the largest drug pipelines in American history. Barry set up shop there. New planes, modified aircraft, hidden storage areas, everything he needed to keep the cartel's product flowing. But the bigger he got, the harder it became to hide. Strange flights were coming in at odd hours. Fuel records didn't make sense. Local residents started noticing unfamiliar planes arriving and leaving with no explanation. And soon, federal agents noticed too. The DEA, Customs, and even the FBI began watching the pattern. Something was moving through Arkansas. Something big. Barry didn't know it yet, but the window of time where he could operate freely was closing fast. His success had built an empire, but it also put a target on his back. The DEA was getting closer, and Barry's next flight wouldn't be for profit. It would be the one that finally caught up with him. On what started as a routine run, federal agents were already waiting. They had been tracking his routes, mapping his patterns, and studying every unusual takeoff coming out of Arkansas and Louisiana. This time, when Barry landed, he didn't find pickup crews or cartel contacts. He found federal agents surrounding his plane. There was no escape, no smooth talk, no second runway to disappear onto. Barry Seal, one of the most successful smugglers in the country, was finally arrested. And just like that, the man who had outrun radar, law enforcement, and even the cartel for years was now staring at charges that could put him away for the rest of his life. Barry Seal, after nearly 7 straight years of smuggling, was finally shut down. During that time, he had made tens of millions of dollars, flying more drugs into the United States than almost any pilot in history. He wasn't caught because he got sloppy. He was caught because he had become too big to ignore. The empire he built in the sky had finally come crashing back to Earth. But Barry got brought into a room, and while staring down the charges of life in prison, he flipped. Once the DEA flipped Barry, they didn't want him sitting in an office or giving statements. They wanted him back in the air, doing the exact thing that got him arrested. Barry became an undercover asset. His job was simple on paper, but deadly in reality. Fly into cartel territory, act like everything was normal, and gather evidence on the Medellin operation. The government had him. Record conversations, track routes, identify key players, and confirm who was moving product where. They even had him fly missions that overlapped with CIA interests in Central America, putting him in places where politics, drugs, and covert operations blurred together. Each flight built the case the U.S. needed. Each mission pushed Barry further into danger, and eventually, one operation gave the government something explosive. Proof of high-level cartel involvement that they later used on national television. But exposing the cartel came with a cost. Word spread back to Medellin, and when they discovered Barry Seal had turned, there was no escaping what came next. Barry's protection didn't last. He refused to disappear, kept moving around Louisiana, and was eventually ordered to report to the same place every night, making him an easy target. On February 19, 1986, Barry Seal was assassinated by cartel hitmen. He died in his car in Baton Rouge at just 46 years old.